There are dangers in life that do not arrive with noise. They do not knock on the door. They do not give warning. They do not cause pain right away. They are simply there, very close, very familiar. In a small kitchen. Inside a refrigerator. In meals repeated day after day, never once questioned. After the age of 60, people often fear the word illness. But they rarely fear the habits they have lived with for half their lives. Because those habits feel too familiar to be dangerous. Too close to be called wrong. Have you ever asked yourself what truly causes a blood clot to form? It is not the moment you fall to the floor. Not the sound of the ambulance arriving. But hundreds of ordinary mornings before that. Mornings that look exactly the same. No crisis. No warning signs. People often say that a stroke comes suddenly. But to the body, nothing is sudden at all. It is simply the result of many things being ignored for a very long time. Today's story does not begin in a hospital. There are no medical machines. No doctors. No diagnosis. It begins in a place that feels very familiar. A small kitchen belonging to a retired American man. A morning no different from thousands of mornings before it. And perhaps, it feels very much like the morning of many people listening to this story now. Robert Miller is 67 years old. He lives alone in a quiet suburb in Ohio. His house is not large. One floor. Old, but tidy. Robert used to be an electrician. 35 years of physical work. Climbing ladders. Fixing wires one by one. He retired when his back began to ache more often and his knees no longer worked the way they used to. His wife passed away 8 years ago. After a short illness. His 2 children are grown now. They live in different states. They still call him regularly. They stop by when they can on weekends. Robert is not lonely in the way people often imagine. He is used to the quiet. Used to taking care of himself. Used to the slower rhythm of life after a lifetime of work. Robert's mornings always begin the same way. He wakes up at 6:30. Opens the curtains. Looks out at the small yard. He makes coffee. Takes out some bread. A little deli meat or sausage. He eats while listening to the morning news. Stories about politics. About society. About prices going up. Rarely about the health of older adults. Robert does not think of himself as uninformed. He knows that eating too much red meat is not good. He has heard that fried foods are bad for the heart. He knows that sugar is not good for older people. But knowing and doing are two very different things. In Robert's mind, he is not a sick man. His blood pressure is only slightly high. The doctor said to keep an eye on it. His cholesterol is not too serious. He tells himself that at this age, everyone has a few numbers that are not perfect. Some afternoons, standing in front of the refrigerator, Robert hesitates. He knows he should eat lighter. He should cook something simple. He should make a change. But then he asks himself, change for what, when he has lived this way for decades? This body has endured years of hard physical labor. What difference can one more meal really make? It is not carelessness. It is a very familiar compromise between a person and himself. Some things in life are not always clearly right or wrong. They are simply convenient. And convenience is easy to accept. For Robert, processed red meat is not just food. It is something tied to an entire chapter of his life. Weekend barbecues in the backyard. Friends coming over. Laughter. The light smell of meat on the grill. After his wife passed away, those memories made it even harder for Robert to let go. The deli meat in the refrigerator gave him a sense of familiarity. As if life had not changed all that much. Fried food was the same. A box of fried chicken picked up late in the evening. No cooking required. No cleanup afterward. For someone living alone, convenience sometimes matters more than anything else. Frozen meals and canned foods became a lifeline. Just a few minutes in the microwave. No thinking. No preparation. Robert once believed that as long as he did not eat too much, everything would be fine. He did not notice the small changes happening in his body, because they happened slowly. Too slowly to be noticed. Some afternoons, Robert felt a heaviness in his head. At times, a slight numbness in his arms or legs. But he told himself it was just age. Getting older. Everyone goes through it. His daughter had mentioned it once. Gently. Without blame. She said that many people suffer strokes not because they smoke or drink, but because of long-term eating habits that no longer suit their bodies. Robert listened. He nodded. But inside, he had a different thought. If it were truly that dangerous, why was it sold everywhere? Why were supermarket shelves still full of those foods? Why did no one warn people more clearly? It was a quiet kind of debate within society. Where does responsibility really lie? With the consumer? Or with the system itself? Robert was not against advice. But he also did not feel he had a strong enough reason to change right away. He did not know that inside his small blood vessels, changes were already taking place. Not loudly. Not painfully. Fat slowly accumulated. The vessel walls grew thicker. Blood flow became just a little slower each day. The body does not speak up right away, but it remembers everything. One day, Robert stood in the supermarket for a long time. In front of him were two choices. A familiar frozen meal, and a simple dish that required cooking. He looked at his watch. Thought about washing dishes. Thought about the quiet, empty kitchen. In the end, he chose what was familiar. Not because he did not care about his health, but because he thought, just one more day, it will be fine. In moments that small, people rarely think about what they are trading away. It feels like an ordinary decision. A very human one. And it is from these ordinary decisions that something much larger begins to take shape. That morning began like every other morning over many years. There was no sign. No sense of unease. Robert woke up while the winter light was still faint. It was cold, but not harsh. He pulled on a light jacket, walked into the kitchen, and turned on the light. The kitchen looked the same as always. The old wooden table. The coffee maker in its familiar corner. Robert stood there, and for a very brief moment, he felt slightly dizzy. Just a passing sensation. He thought he had stood up too quickly. He reached for the glass. And then, his hand did not do what he expected. The glass slipped from his grip. The sound of it hitting the floor echoed in the quiet kitchen. It shattered. Robert looked down at the floor. He wanted to bend down and pick it up. But his knees would not respond. A heavy sensation ran down his arm. Not pain. Just heaviness. He tried to say something. Maybe to call his own name. Maybe to call out for someone. No sound came out the way he intended. In that moment, Robert did not think about a stroke. He did not think about illness. The only thing in his mind was confusion. Why this body, the body that had worked with him for decades, was no longer responding. He tried to stand up straight. But his legs gave way. The fall was not violent. He did not hit his head. There was no sharp pain. But it was a very real fall. And for the first time in his life, Robert could not get up on his own. Lying on the cold kitchen floor, he saw his phone just a few steps away. That distance suddenly felt very far. He reached out toward it. His arm did not extend the way he expected. Fragmented thoughts began to appear in his mind. Unclear. Disconnected. He thought of his wife. He thought of the empty house. He thought of the times his daughter had told him to pay attention to his health. But he could not organize any of it into words. Robert did not panic. Not because he was brave, but because he did not yet understand what was happening. Part of him still believed that if he stayed still for a moment, everything would return to normal. Like a muscle cramp. Like a brief dizzy spell. But 1 minute passed. Then another. And his body did not respond. The first sound he heard was not a siren. It was knocking at the door. A neighbor had heard the glass break. They called his name. There was no answer. The door was opened. When the paramedics arrived, Robert saw them as if through a thin layer of fog. He heard voices, but he could not fully understand them. Inside the ambulance, one thought became very clear to him. He was afraid. Not afraid of dying, but afraid of losing control. Afraid that this body no longer belonged to him. Robert woke up in a hospital room under white lights. There were no loud machines. Only a heavy silence. He tried to move his hand. This time, it moved. Slowly. But it moved. The doctor spoke to him calmly. No scare tactics. No blame. A small blood clot. Caught in time. Recovery was possible. Robert listened to every word. But his mind kept circling one question. Why me? He did not smoke. He did not drink heavily. He no longer worked himself to exhaustion like he did when he was younger. The doctor did not answer that question in the way Robert expected. There was no single cause. Only a process. The doctor explained that blood clots rarely form overnight. They are the result of many years. Many small habits. Not the last meal, but thousands of meals before it. Robert lay there, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, he understood something he had never truly considered before. The body does not betray you in one day. It only reflects how you have treated it over many years. During his days in the hospital, Robert had a lot of time to think. No television running all day. No tasks to complete. Only silence and himself. He remembered the signals his body had sent. The heavy-headed afternoons. The brief tingling in his hands. He had always assumed it was age. And in some ways, he was not wrong. But age was not the only reason. It simply brought the consequences closer. Robert began to face a difficult truth. Not everything that is legally sold is safe when used over a long time. Modern society makes life more convenient. But it also makes people listen to their bodies less. No one forced him to eat the way he did. But there were few things encouraging him to stop. In the hospital, he met others. People his age. Some looked healthier than he did. Some weaker. They all had one thing in common. None of them thought they would be lying there. Robert did not blame himself. He did not blame anyone else. But he understood that responsibility does not rest only on the individual. It also lies in how society treats older adults. Convenience foods are designed for busy people. But retirees are drawn into them as well. Because they are easy. Because they are affordable. Because they are everywhere. Advertising talks about taste. About comfort. It rarely talks about what builds up over decades. Robert thought about old friends. People living alone. People who eat just to get through the day. He wondered how many of them were walking the same path without knowing it. Robert's realization did not arrive as a dramatic promise to change. It came slowly. Quietly. He did not believe he would become a perfect eater. He did not trust extreme changes. But for the first time, he thought about listening to his body more closely. About questioning familiar choices. Not out of fear, but out of respect for the years he still had. One quiet afternoon in the hospital, Robert looked out the window. He realized that the fall in his kitchen did more than knock him to the floor. It made him stop. And sometimes, that moment of stopping is the most important thing the body is trying to say. After the mild stroke, Robert did not become a different person overnight. He did not wake up with a grand resolution. There were no promises to transform his life. In the first days after returning home, he was still Robert. The same house. The same kitchen table. The same quiet mornings. Only one thing was different. He began paying a little more attention to his body. Not with anxiety, but with awareness. When he stood up too quickly, he paused for a few seconds. When his hand tingled slightly, he no longer brushed it off. When he felt tired, he allowed himself to rest. Robert realized that for many years, he had treated his body like a durable machine. As long as it kept running, he kept using it. He never thought about maintenance until it stopped. The fall in the kitchen did not make him afraid of food. It simply made him ask questions. He began to wonder why eating had become something to argue about. Why health advice was often seen as interference with personal freedom. In America, choice is deeply valued. What you eat is your right. Robert understood that. He believed in that. But he began to notice a gap between choice and complete information. No one lied to him. But no one told the whole story either. No one explained that a little bit every day, over many years, can create consequences far greater than one obvious mistake. Robert thought about food advertisements. They spoke about convenience, about saving time, about comfort. They rarely mentioned that as people age, their blood vessels age too. And that what was harmless at 40 can become a burden at 60. Robert did not blame society. He did not blame himself. He simply recognized that older adults are often overlooked in how modern life is designed. Food is made for busy people. But retirees are often the ones using it the most. Because they live alone. Because they do not want complicated cooking. Because they believe that at this age, there is no need to be strict. Robert began to change in very small ways. Not by eliminating old foods completely, but by letting them appear less often. He no longer ate processed meats every day. Not out of fear, but because he no longer needed them as emotional comfort. He did not completely reject fried food, but he stopped treating it as an automatic reward at the end of each day. He still used frozen meals, but he read labels more carefully, and he paid attention to how his body responded. The most important thing was not a diet. It was awareness. Robert understood that the body does not need perfection. It only needs respect. He thought about old friends. Those who say that at this age, there is no point in changing. Robert does not argue with them. He simply tells his story. Not to persuade, but to share. Because he understands that no one changes because they are forced. People change only when they see themselves in someone else's story. One morning, several months later, Robert stood again in his familiar kitchen. Sunlight came through the window. The house was as quiet as ever. He brewed coffee. Prepared breakfast. Nothing special. No symbolic moment. He was fortunate. Not because he was healthier than others, but because his fall did not take away his ability to speak, to walk, or to make decisions for himself. Not everyone gets the chance to stop the way he did. Robert's story is not a warning. It is not medical advice. It is simply a life story. One of many that may be unfolding around us. If you are listening to this story, you may think of someone you know. Someone living alone. Someone who often chooses convenience. Someone who always says they're fine. Or perhaps you recognize a part of yourself. There is no need to change everything. There is no need to fear food. Just pause for a moment and ask what this choice is serving. Today's convenience, or the health of the years ahead. If this story made you think, share it. Not as a warning, but as a reminder that the quietest things are often the most important. And if you would like to hear more life stories, where health is not spoken through medical terms but through real human experience, stay with us. Because sometimes, a story told at the right moment can change how a person sees themselves.